You know, when the historical event of Karbala comes up, our minds almost immediately jump to a very specific set of images, right? We think of the intense thirst, the unimaginable sacrifice, and that ultimate tragedy unfolding on the 10th of Muharram in a harsh, unforgiving desert. But where did this journey actually begin? It's a super common misconception that this whole story kicks off in the desert, or maybe on the dusty roads of Kufa. Well, the truth, based on the historical sources we're digging into today, is completely different. We're going to trace this all the way back to its absolute origin, and honestly, I think you'll find that the true starting point completely changes how we understand everything that happened next. So welcome to this explainer. Today, we are exploring the sacred exodus from Medina to Karbala. We're going to map out the exact how, when, and why Imam Hussain, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, started this monumental journey. Let's dive right in. We'll be using historical records to track the footsteps of this caravan. And as you'll see, this wasn't the start of a sudden battle. It was a deliberate, calculated, and deeply principled migration. To really get this, we have to look at the stark sensory contrast at the heart of the story. On one hand, you have the cool, peaceful nights of Medina, just resting in the tranquil shade of the Prophet's mosque. And on the other, the scorching, volatile sands of Karbala. The roots of this massive historical tragedy definitely don't lie in the heat of a sudden battlefield. They were planted right in the quiet safety of a hometown. Understanding this is absolutely crucial because it highlights what was willingly left behind. It sets the stage for a journey driven entirely by conviction, literally forcing an exit from absolute peace straight into absolute affliction. Which brings us to section 1, the true starting point. The year is 60 Hijri. Following the death of Muawiyah, Yazid takes the throne and sends out an uncompromising directive. He demands absolute allegiance from city governors, and he's targeting one man specifically, Hussein ibn Ali. Summoned in the dead of night, Hussein is basically handed an ultimatum. And this is where things get incredibly tense. When pressured to submit, Imam Hussain drops this legendary response. A person like me cannot pledge allegiance to a person like Yazid. Allegiance is public, we will see in the morning. So the key takeaway here is that this wasn't just some minor political disagreement. It was a fundamental, unshakable refusal. According to the source material, that late-night meeting drew an unmistakable line in the sand between truth and falsehood. It became crystal clear that staying in Medina just wasn't an option anymore, especially since the order was to secure his allegiance by literally any means necessary. Right after that confrontation, the historical accounts describe a scene that is just heartbreaking. Hussein goes to the tomb of his grandfather, Prophet Muhammad. The records say he spent a long time there, praying, weeping, and essentially saying his goodbyes. He actually says, "Grandfather, I am being forced to leave your city." He then goes to visit the resting place of his brother, Imam Hussain. This really humanizes the moment, doesn't it? It shows the heavy personal toll. He wasn't leaving out of some grand political ambition. He was being forced out of his home, knowing full well that the sanctuary of Medina was completely compromised. Section 2, the last night in Medina. Picture the scene for a second. It's the 28th of Rajab, a quiet Sunday night. But inside Imam Hussein's household, it is anything but quiet. Final preparations are underway for an irreversible departure into the totally unknown. They're about to step out of the only home they've ever known, sneaking out under the cover of darkness. Now, looking at this caravan absolutely shatters a huge historical myth. Let's break down who was actually there versus who wasn't. Who was there? A family, women, children, and fiercely loyal companions. The sources specifically name figures like Lady Zainab, Imam Zain al-Abidin, Abbas, Ali Akbar, Ali Asghar, and Qasim. But who wasn't there? An invading army. There was zero military force. They weren't marching off to conquer anything. They were literally a household leaving their hometown in the dark. That's a real game changer of a detail, because it completely reframes the entire nature of a movement. Moving right into section 3, a sacred migration begins. Because of exactly who was in that caravan, the sources make it super clear that this wasn't a march to war, not at all. It was a peaceful displacement meant to uphold a deeply held moral principle. Having to leave the city of your birth, That was the very first great sacrifice of this movement. To really put the scale of this into perspective, let's look at the timeline. They leave Medina on the 28th of Rajab. After roughly 5 days on the road, they arrive in Mecca on the 3rd of Shaban. They actually stay there for months, eventually packing up and leaving Mecca on the 8th of Zulhijjah, before finally hitting Karbala on the 2nd of Muharram. So you see, this wasn't some chaotic overnight escape. It was a highly deliberate, calculated progression across the Arabian Peninsula that spanned months and several distinct phases. Section 4. 4 months in Mecca. During this long sanctuary stay, a massive development happens. Out of nowhere, hundreds of desperate letters start pouring in from Kufa, practically begging for Hussein's presence and leadership. Responding to all these pleas, Imam Hussain takes a very measured step. He doesn't just rush over. Instead, he sends his trusted cousin, Muslim bin Aqil, to Kufa to get a read-on-the-ground reality and verify what these letters are claiming. It's basically a diplomatic fact-finding mission. But as the source text warns us, the situation in Kufa was about to undergo a rapid, tragic shift that would completely derail the trajectory of his journey. While Muslim bin Aqil is checking things out in Kufa, the situation back in Mecca reaches a boiling point, literally on the very day of Hajj. Hussein gets intelligence that assassins sent by Yazid have infiltrated the Kaaba disguised as everyday pilgrims. Driven by this profound need to protect the absolute sanctity of the sanctuary from bloodshed, Hussein makes a huge, unprecedented decision. He converts his Hajj into a lesser Umrah and immediately packs up for Iraq. He literally chose to walk away from the holiest site in Islam rather than see it violated by his own assassination. So, they're on the road to Iraq, and the tension is just skyrocketing. Suddenly, the caravan gets devastating news. Muslim bin Aqil has been martyred in Kufa. The tide there had entirely turned against them. Hearing this, a lot of the opportunistic supporters who had tagged along jump ship, but Hussein's resolve? Completely unshaken. Shortly after that, they get intercepted by an army commander named Hur. Hur's forces explicitly block their paths to Kufa, forcing this small family caravan off the main roads and onto entirely unknown, harsh, non-commercial routes. Which brings us to Section 5, Arrival at Karbala. On the 2nd of Muharram, in the year 61 Hijri, the exhausted caravan finally comes to a halt in this desolate, unfamiliar terrain that locals initially called Nainawa. And this is what I consider the ultimate dramatic climax of the entire exodus. Imam Hussain stops the caravan. He looks out at this strange, barren territory they've been pushed into, turns to the locals, and asks a simple but impossibly heavy question. What is the name of this land? And the answer he gets would literally echo through history. The locals reply, Karbala, a name that translates to the land of anguish and affliction. When Imam Hussain hears this, he delivers this immortal realization. He says, yes, this is Karbala. This is our resting place. Here our blood will be shed. It is just a moment of profound, heavy acceptance. The journey that started with a peaceful refusal back in Madina, that saw a family sneak out of their home in the dead of night, finally reaches its tragic, prophesied destination in the scorching heat of Karbala. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. This journey wasn't an accidental skirmish. It was a deliberate exodus away from compromise. Ask yourself, if standing for the truth costs you your home, forces you to uproot your entire family, and ultimately ends in absolute affliction, is the principle worth the ultimate sacrifice? The historical records we went through today show us exactly how Imam Hussain answered that question. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope this deep dive gave you a much clearer, more structured understanding of the true origins of the sacred Exodus. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.